Dr. Christopher Barker, and welcome to Holding Space. Today, we are holding space for Dr. Audrey Tang, who is quite well known in the UK, I do believe. You, I'm honored to have you here, as I was saying before, because you do everything. I mean, talking about television, TED Talks, you talk about wellness, you talk about communication, you talk about burlesque. There's some very unusual applications, but so brilliant in a lot of ways. And so with that brief introduction, I'm going to just let you tell everybody about yourself and we'll go with it from there.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. And this is such a great podcast because your work is so important. And I actually sometimes think it's a little bit misunderstood. Trauma is a little bit misunderstood, especially in the UK, because it's becoming a bit of a buzzword. But I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. A bit about me. All of my work, and I know it's very diverse, but it all comes down to building confidence in people. I was originally trained as a school teacher. I used to teach drama and psychology, and every single day I was inspired when I was teaching drama by the creativity, especially of the younger students. But I did notice as people got older, there was more fear. What do I need to do for the exams? How do I make sure I get the best marks? And this continues with us into our adult lives. And so as a freelance trainer now, even in leadership, even in organizations, I still talk about things like performance, public speaking, presentations, all of those things where people sit there and go, oh, I don't know what to do. And actually there's some simple solutions that you can use to make yourself feel better. But there's that assumption as an adult, if I'm not doing it perfectly, I'm not doing it well at all, and therefore I'm not going to do it. And then my work in burlesque it's community work, but it's one of the most wonderful sessions that I run. It's one of my favorite sessions. And that's about building confidence in women, especially when we get to between 30 and 50, we become a little bit invisible because we get subsumed into the roles that we play, mum, sister, carer, and then you become part of that sandwich generation as well. So you're caring for younger children as well as aging parents and so on, and you forget who you are. And so a lot of my burlesque work is about rediscovering that through play, through choreography, through the costumes and so on. But everything I do is about confidence and, by the same token, well-being.
Yeah, I love the one of the videos that you have that says that I control what I show and what I don't show. And
Yep.
that's something that, again, when we often feel we're on stage for this, that, or the other thing, and where insecurity pops up, is it's important to feel like I have agency. I have some control over what I'm showing.
It's scary how often we lose that, especially as adults, because it almost feels like we get so consumed by the rules and the regulations. I mustn't do that. I mustn't say this. I mustn't behave in this particular way, or that's not the me that everybody knows. And I think sometimes we become more scared as adults than we were as children when there was a little bit more freedom and probably a little bit more of oh, they're just children. They can do that. But I just think that's a real shame because life is about living. It's not about just sticking to rules which may be completely outdated by now.
Yes, I love that. I do. And I know also you've done some work in leadership, and that's also really important.
Yeah, I do a lot of work on well-being in particular. This really flourished during COVID. And it's a terrible thing to say, but I think I got very lucky with COVID because that was when well-being became so important. And what I do is I give people practical tools to work with. It's very easy for people to say, oh, you just need to look after your well-being. How? What am I supposed to do with that information? And so what I work on is actually creating tools and collecting tools from other people as well, always citing them, of course, to help people reclaim their sense of agency, boost their well-being, reduce stress or reduce the negative effects of stress, because of course some stress is actually quite good for us, and build their emotional and mental resilience. And I do that a lot in organizations. I also do things like team bonding and team building, and I do that through escape rooms. So again, a lot of my work is really practical. I have a tabletop escape room where I will take it into organizations and we'll do it. You'll have 10 different tables, so 10 different groups all competing with each other in this 1 hour task. And then I'll make them do quite silly things in the middle of it. And then we reflect on what they've learned. And what I really love about that session is I always open with what makes a good team. And everyone says, oh, praise and motivation and all of those kinds of things. Then you get them into this team building environment. And everyone is so fixated on the tasks and beating the other team and getting it right that they don't like sharing with each other. They don't praise each other. They don't ask each other anything. And you can reflect on that. And then that starts that conversation with, okay, so this is what happened. How does that feature in your day to day when you're under pressure? And that opens a whole lot of self-awareness.
That's great. I have frequently found in my work with people that exercises and demonstrations and things like that are so good because it integrates not only just what you're hearing, but also what you're doing. And then we can process that. And people are looking back and going, weeks later, people will say, well, remember when we did that tug of war thing? And yeah, I mean, those things are just so valuable. I love that.
Absolutely. And this probably speaks to the work that you do in trauma as well. So often, especially when you're dealing with leaders and C-suite and so on, everyone works up here. They don't actually work in their bodies. And so people think they can think their way out of things. And actually, you know what? 7 out of 10 times they probably can because they're really skilled at it. But that just leaves you feeling a little bit, oh, something doesn't quite feel right, but I don't know what it is. It's all right. I'll think about it. And that stops working after a while. And we do need to start integrating doing with reflection rather than just, I'll think it and so it will work for me.
Yes, you're right. And the thinking alone is not enough. The thinking and the doing have to be combined. And being able to teach that to people and have that spread, and especially to organizations that can sort of like filter that from the top downward and create more teamwork and community is really important.
Yeah, thank you. The difficulty that we're finding, certainly in the UK, with organizational psychologists or business psychologists like myself, is that a lot of interventions are currently really focused at the individual level. So a lot of us are feeling we go in and we teach all of this well-being, stress busting, all of that, then send people right back to the same toxic environment that caused the problem in the first place. And there's been a recent move. Karen Scholes is one of the researchers who's looking at this. There are others, and to take a psychosocial health and safety approach to intervention. And I really like this idea because this hammers home the importance of looking at the environment a little bit more broadly. The best way to describe this is to create psychological safety, you take a more physical health and safety approach. So the example there is, if I go to work and I fall down a hole, health and safety fix the hole. They don't actually say to me, well, we're going to give you training to walk around the hole. We're going to give you courses on how to get out of the hole. And yet, when somebody is burnt out, what happens? We go, well, we'll give you courses to not be burnt out. We actually need to be fixing the hole. And
Yeah.
that analogy is really helpful for people to at least start thinking about this with the organization. And when you then begin to probe this a little bit more, you recognize that it's not just the individual intervention that needs to happen. The environment needs to be set up in order for people to be able to fail, to get back up again, to find they have support, to make mistakes, and so on. And this only takes teeny little tweaks, and it's a lot easier than people realize.
Yeah, I've been talking recently about some of the posts I've done on LinkedIn are about an ecological approach to solving problems. And you have to look at the entire environment. It's not just one element. And ecology is not just a person on a planet. It is the environment. It is what we do with the environment. The whole system needs to be involved.
Yeah,
And it's hard to
absolutely.
do.
It is really hard to do, but I'm using this framework at the moment, which I've developed called SPACE, which allows us to look more at the environment. And the acronym stands for S is social. So let's just take the example of in the UK, there's been recent research, about 66% are either obese or overweight who are in the workplace. And so let's have a look at somebody who might be underperforming. So socially, and that's the S of space, you might look at that and go, okay, well, let's just tell people to be, nice about weight. Let's not make any comments. We know that. We know that. That intervention is at the individual level. We know not to be nasty. However, we need to look at maybe what is normalized in the workplace within the social environment. Do people often go for drinks after work? Or do people often have cake on Fridays or something like that, which is not conducive for that person's good health? But then if they don't partake in it because they're looking after their health, are people then saying, oh, well, they don't want to join in, and then judging them unfairly? So that's look at the social and what might be going on there. The physical, the P, is also really important, because if it's not in your landscape to understand something, it's really difficult to perceive it from someone else's. Let's take somebody who is overweight. They go into the workplace and it's an open plan office, but they actually struggle to move in between desks, or they worry about whether the chair's actually going to support them. Now, these things should not be things that they have to think about. These things should be recognized by those in charge and dealt with dignity and grace and no embarrassment to anybody. Because when you think about somebody who lacks confidence, likely because they've had jokes about their appearance their whole life, they don't want to talk about this. And yet they're in a physical space, which is really uncomfortable for them. So then the next one is authority, A, in space. And authority looks at what is normalized in terms of the higher level processes, for example, HR. Now, what can happen with weight and age and all of these stereotypes is that when somebody's off sick, actually they'll put it down to, oh, that person's off sick because of their weight. It's something weight related. So actually, if HR are noting down exactly what is going wrong, then A, you might find useful patterns if other people are also going off with that, but B, you're not propagating unhelpful stereotypes. So again, which can again lead to a culture which you weren't expecting. C stands for convention or custom, what is usually done. Now, a lot of organizations, they like doing running at lunchtime and things like that, which is great. However, how conducive is it for somebody who already is struggling? So there's one organization which is nice. They do a handicap version of a 5K run. So they have different start times, which I think is really helpful. So something like that can be really good. And then E is the whole experience of being in that environment. So for example, if you all have to wear PPE, does that person actually know that when they turn up to that, it's going to fit them and it's not going to be embarrassing for them? There was a great, awful example on America's Next Top Model. They were absolutely campaigning for, we want women living in larger bodies. We want plus size models. We want all of that. And these women got to that fashion shoot, nothing fitted them. So you can't be saying that you believe X, Y, and Z in your values when that's not actually what people are experiencing. And so that's where I think the environment and the space that you create and that you hold for people makes a huge difference to their confidence and overall their performance.
No, that's absolutely true, and that's a great example, saying that we have room for diversity and yet at the same time not creating space for diversity is it sets you up for failure. And again, it makes people feel inferior. It makes people feel that there's just no point in trying. And so they lose motivation and, there goes
Exactly.
productivity, there goes like personal mental health, everything.
Yeah. And it's kind of, you just set them up to fail. That's the actual problem. I was doing some work with Justine, and they do a lot of excellent research into the value of food and lunchtime with organizations provide food and so on. But one of the really interesting findings that's come out of research is that some organizations provide food, but it's things like chips, which is then leading to people feeling, yeah, okay, great, we got free food, but it's chips. So I'm really sluggish and I'm struggling to digest. And then that nutrition effect, that physiological effect, is being perceived as they're undermotivated, they're not performing. And again, you've just set someone up to fail. And I think it's really important when places like Justine and so on highlight these points, because we need to take a long, hard look about what we're doing in organizations as interventions, because if they're not fit for purpose, you could be making things worse.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I've seen that happen so often that what is set up is set up from one perspective. I think you need more of a teamwork approach to how to set this up so that it is for everybody. Have the
Yeah,
people that you're trying to reach be representative also in informing that. So again, a whole teamwork approach is the best way to go about it.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm glad you're facilitating that. Tell us some more about some other things that you're doing. What are your current projects?
Well, I am working a lot on confidence at the moment. And at the moment, I always joke about this. I've been teaching well-being and confidence for years, and I went independent in 2014. So we're talking years. And then 3 years ago, I trained as a burlesque instructor, and suddenly I'm doing TEDx. Suddenly I'm in the United Nations State of the World Population Report. Suddenly I'm in the papers because burlesque is the exciting thing that everyone wants to talk about. And and it's great and it's wonderful, but that is just one aspect of, I think, the problems that we're dealing with. And so, as I say, all of my work, when I go into organizations or whether I work one to one with individuals, it is about building confidence. Most of my organizational work is about stress busting, resilience building. Tonight, I'm doing a stress busting session at a networking event and so on. So I do a lot of ad hoc work, but it all sits under the same bracket. It is about well-being, confidence, and by that token, performance. I still have my podcast and YouTube and LinkedIn show, which is Mental Health Matters. And I'm developing another project, which I really want, where I want to have slightly more in-depth conversations with people. With Mental Health Matters, that's very much about this is what we do, this is the advice or support we can give. Obviously, it does not substitute professional intervention, but I also want to look at what happens beneath the professional mask, because I really believe that all of us do have that professional facade, which is very important and it is what pays our bills. But we might well be hiding something beneath that, and if we are hiding something, is that costing us in some way? And I think that's a very interesting space to explore. And that's what I'm hoping to also start looking into. And I'm in the process of developing a podcast and YouTube show around that.
That's really interesting. One of the things I supervise interns and entry level therapists, baby therapists, they call themselves. And one of the things that I frequently have to talk about is they say in school they teach us not to say anything about ourselves, not to, and that mask becomes very heavy. And when you're constantly weighing your words and you're constantly figuring out, well, what can I say, what can I not say? It comes across as stiffness and it comes across and it's unfulfilling, it burns you out. And being able to be yourself and being able to like be in touch and that requires that you address your own mental health issues also and that you deal with your own stuff. So you know who you are when you go into that and you can show some of that. Not to take over the session, but to just like really be there and be present.
Well, actually, again, though, the work that you do in acknowledging that and getting people to talk more about that often will prevent it from taking over the session. Because if it's unspoken and it's bottled up, that's when it leaks out and that's when it can become more problematic. But I think you've said a very, very key thing. One of the things, and people don't like me saying this because it's so obvious, but you'll know when I say it. I'm always asked, what is the one thing people really need to perform better and so on? And I genuinely think is self-awareness. That's it. Just be a little bit more aware of how you're coming across, who you are, what you're trying to do, the bits that you're hiding, the bits that you're trying not to show. And once you have that, you don't need to tell everyone about it, but being aware of that, and you don't have to change it, makes you a better person.
Yes. Yes, the awareness is what matters. It's embracing the shadow. There's all kinds of models of it, but it's so often we just don't do that stuff. We feel like that there's a professional persona that we have to maintain. And I think you can do that and still be fully aware of who you are and what you share and what you don't. It's
Yeah.
it's important to know thyself, as they say.
Yes.
That's really important. I'm really glad you're doing that. If there's any way I can participate, I would love to because
Oh,
it's such it's a great cause.
well, you're definitely coming onto my podcast, which I'm very excited about. So I look forward to sharing your work as well, because what I set up Mental Health Matters to do was to challenge a lot of the saturated wellness field at the moment, which has a lot of influencers, a lot of lived experience. Now, lived experience is great, and I place a lot of value in that. However, if somebody is trying to monetize their lived experience to market whatever solution work for them, that may be wholly inappropriate and not helpful for the majority of people. And you can always tell the trained practitioners, because they will tend to say a lot of the time, this does not substitute professional intervention. This is for educational purposes. You understand what your remit is. But if somebody is saying you must do this for depression and their marketing is huge and exciting, well, people are going to be taken in by that. And that really worries me, because at best, nothing will happen. At worst, you could be causing bigger problems, not just for the other person, but for yourself as well. And you'll know this. Safeguarding yourself as a therapist is so, so important. And so I think that that's the key thing that I was trying to rally against. So if somebody is looking for information on trauma, information on depression, information on menopause, I have the experts on the show who are trained in those fields, who can actually point people in the appropriate directions.
That's great. You get the perspectives. Yes. I I think you have a really wonderful approach to dealing with these things, and I'm looking forward to doing your podcast also. I'm a little nervous about it because, you know,
It'll be amazing.
again, this time instead of me sitting here talking to you, you'd be interviewing me. Scary, but
It's okay.
at,
I
at least
send
I'm honest
questions in
about it.
advance, not because I want people to prepare the answers, but just so you know, I'm not trying to trip anyone up, and I'm going in that particular direction. But also, it means that if you don't want to talk about something, or you think that that's not fully formed yet, or whatever, just you can say, and then I can change that on the fly. So that's no problem.
Yeah, same rules we would apply to working with someone in therapy.
Yeah.
That's great. Are you still do you see people individually for therapy?
I'm not a therapist, I'm a coach, and I have to make that distinction. I am not trained as a therapist. I have so much respect for therapists. I have not the temperament to be a therapist. And so coaching, where I was trained through the NHS, that really suits me. And so I do see individuals. My preference is for my training, though. I love group classes. I love speaking. I love doing the presentations. I like working in larger environments. And so I do have a few coaching clients. I have some who've just been with me for, I say, a long time. They've come back to me. I try and stop after 6 sessions because, technically we don't want you back. But if you've come back on a different issue, that's fine. So I do still a little bit of that. And I work with organizations. They sometimes refer people to me as well. But my main work, and the work I find the most joy from, is the workshops that I deliver, the webinars and the group training.
That's good. I find it hard to balance. I mean, I have a lot of people that I see individually. And then, there are chances to do things like this where I get a chance to have podcasts and have more of a collaborative approach. And you're right. I mean, you get a different energy from working with a group,
Yeah.
and you can work with one person and you can make changes for one person's life. But sometimes the realizations and the energy that flows from a group is just so much different.
I agree. And I think one of the most beautiful things that burlesque has led to is that we do a lot of wellbeing workshops for the community. So we'll have speakers to talk about menopause or sexual wellbeing across the lifespan and so on. And what you get is when somebody puts up their hand and asks a question, because they know it's a safe space to do so, somebody else might then say, "Oh my goodness, I've had the same experience." And that just makes that connection even better, because people then don't feel alone. They don't feel as if they're weird for having had that, or something's wrong with them. I mean, the example that sticks in my mind all the time is, it was a menopause event, and one woman put her hand up and said, "Well, when I went to the doctor, they told me my issues were just to do with my weight." And it's just kind of, that's a lack of understanding about menopause there, right there. And then another woman put up her hand and said, "That happened to me." And I remember sitting there thinking, do I want to hope that there's one doctor who's giving really bad advice? Or is it better that actually they were different experiences? I don't know what's worse, because clearly there's a lack of training involved there. There's a training need that is uncovered in that. But what was lovely in that session is those two women didn't feel alone, and they didn't feel shamed. And they had been feeling shamed because of that interaction. And as you know, shame is one of those most awful emotions that can prohibit us from doing so many things.
That's true. One of the things that I talk about in my upcoming book, here's a chance for me to plug my upcoming book, is that how shame becomes your identity. How, early experiences and lack of connection, and then things that we follow later on, that the seeds of that find root later on in life as we experience things that make us feel not that, oh, this is a situation that I can change, or this is an individual issue. This is me, I'm the problem. And, again, it appeals to that darker place in people where they just really don't believe in themselves anymore.
And I think that's so sad because, and then this comes back to the importance of the doing aspect and the getting into your body a little bit more, because I think it's very easy to, once you've got that mindset and then you have the insights because you've been working with a therapist, to actually feel like those insights are making a massive difference, which they will be. But if you're not taking any action to make practical changes beyond that, having loads of insights is not going to help you as much as actually what those insights are helping you to do. I don't know whether you have this in the States, but we certainly experience this in the UK, that there may be a little bit of overdiagnosis going on. And there's a lot of ADHD and a lot of autism being diagnosed at the moment. And the problem there is when people are using that diagnosis as a reason for them not to be able to do something. And I'm not a therapist, but that breaks my heart as a psychologist, because I know that therapy was never created to give people reasons for why they can't. Therapy was created to help people manage and live and thrive and do better with what they have, and to help other people understand that.
Yeah, there's very much an anti-diagnosis, anti-mental illness movement that's going on now that I fully support. Looking at people in context, looking at people in the context of what they've been through, looking at people in the context of what they do, and seeing this as a problem in living, seeing this as something that's been introduced early on, and not an identifiable pathological syndrome, is something that, I really want people to take a look at. And again, that's in my book. Another
Absolutely.
plug, which hopefully will be coming out very soon. But yeah, I mean, being able to see people as problems, or seeing their issues as a problem that has to be diagnosed, medicated, treated as an illness, is so detrimental.
Yes, yes. It takes away agency. It comes back to what we were saying right from the start. And
Yeah.
that that's so sad. That's so sad when you're making people reliant on something which they weren't reliant on before. And I just don't think that's healthy.
Yeah. Well, I do accept insurance for the work that we do in my center. And insurance requires that people have a diagnosis. And so we have to come up with something. And frequently it's kind of, I'm sorry, I have to admit this. Sometimes I just kind of pick things out of a hat, because there are certain things that are covered and there are certain things that are not. But people, again, thanks to confidentiality, that label doesn't really follow you. But people will ask sometimes, what's my diagnosis? As though that's going to define them.
Yeah.
But
And that's so sad. When I was trained as a teacher, we were always told to talk about the behavior, not the child. So
yeah,
you never say you're stupid. That behavior was stupid. That choice may have been stupid. You are not. You're
right.
great. You're absolutely okay just as you are. And I think that's a problem, but I think that speaks to an even larger problem, which is people are feeling so unheard at the moment that they need a diagnosis or something to make them stand out and feel individual and feel recognized. And I just think that's really, really awful. It makes me think about how often we talk about how do we get people offline, because we all know what the problems are with being online too much. But it's not necessarily about putting blocks on phones or bans in schools and so on. I think it's actually about making the offline space much nicer. It's simply about making it a lot more pleasurable to do something with your friends or with your parents or something like that, where you're connecting and enjoying being out in nature. And if we just do a bit more of that, then maybe people just won't be online quite so much because it won't be as appealing.
That's so interesting. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of research goes into creating an algorithm to get people engaged. So,
Yeah.
how do we get an algorithm to keep people in real life and
Yeah.
so that they're engaged out there and in living rather than in doom scrolling, as they say?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But then the difficulty there is, of course, in on a phone, as you're scrolling, so many different things can be there to give you that dopamine hit to keep you interested. And in real life, that may not happen. It's slower. It's one thing that happens, and then you have to plan the next thing that happens. But if you just take that moment to appreciate what's going on whilst you're doing it and be present, that makes a massive, massive difference to the whole experience that you've just had. And we probably need to retrain ourselves and others to enjoy that a little bit more and
Mm.
hold that memory rather than
Yes.
look for the next hit, which is all the phone's doing. And it's, to me, it's a pseudo hit. It's dopamine's great. It's just not very discerning. But yet, when you've done something with people that you love, then I look at my phone memories and that makes me so happy.
Yes. Being able to find depth and being able to find joy in depth is
Yeah,
so much more important. It's so much more meaningful than just going from hit of pleasure, hit of pleasure, hit of pleasure. I mean, old research, if you implant an electrode in a brain and, you give a chance for a person to stimulate themselves, they'll just do that all day long.
yeah.
And I realized that a lot of this is appearing on social media. So I'm really sorry, social media, but I really don't like you very much. So
No,
it's
I
it's
say the same
again
thing a lot when I give comment.
it's kind of like, as much as we need it in order to spread our word, we also want to encourage people to just like turn this off and go out there and do some living and find some things that are enjoyable for you. One of the greatest things that I enjoy, I mentioned I go to Scotland a lot. One of the greatest things that I enjoy, I usually take my youngest son with me because he loves it too, is the hiking. I mean, we walk everywhere. And, climbing up to Arthur's Seat is just that's quite a hike, but, it's risky in a lot of ways, but it's so enjoyable because there's just so many things that happen in that walk, so many things to see, so many things to do, so many memories that you can retain. I can't tell you
Absolutely.
10 things I saw on social media yesterday, but I can tell you every detail of the hike up Arthur's Peak.
And that's so beautiful. And it's really interesting because there's been a recent push to get people walking more by logging walks on their apps and things like that. But the problem is, it's backfired a bit because everyone is getting much more consumed with metrics rather than actually enjoying the walk. And so you sit there kind of go, no, that maybe something else. Maybe you need something else there.
Before we end, is there any words of wisdom in particular that I haven't asked you about that you really want to convey?
I think I come back to self awareness is going to be your biggest gift at any point in time. And when I say self awareness, I'm never saying that you ever need to change who you are if you like being that person and doing that thing. But if you are worried about why something isn't working for you or why people are reacting to you differently or whatever that discrepancy or conflict might be, being self aware will at least help you identify what could be changed, but then it's up to your choice and your agency as to whether you decide to do anything about it.
That's beautiful. That's a really good perspective to have, and empowering the individual is so important. being able to find your own presence, being able to find your own space, being able to live in your own space, live in your own body is just so I love the work you're doing. I'm so glad I got a chance to meet you.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for coming.
Take care. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks.
Bye.